Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Portland. I'm Pete Heuser, your president. Today we have with us City Commissioner Charlie Hales, and he's on his way up. Good. Our program today is sponsored by Providence Health Systems, Portland General Electric, and Wells Fargo Bank. We continue to be very grateful for their corporate support. We have two new members in the audience today. Alexander Himalian, who is an attorney in private practice, and Celia Heron, Interim Director of the Office of Neighborhood Involvement. Would you stand, please, if you're here? Let's welcome them to the club. Now join us next week, February 26th, as David Frohnmeyer will give us an ethics test with his presentation entitled, How Machiavellian Are You? That'll be here at the Multnomah Club. Now, as I mentioned last week, in the coming weeks, we're going to have presentations by our issue committee chairs so that they can talk about the kind of things their committees have been doing this year. Today we have Rod Merrick, who is an architect in private practice and co-chair of the Growth Management and Environment Issue Committee, who will tell us about the things his committee has been doing this year. Rod?
Thank you. I'm the chair of the co-chair of the Growth Management and Environment Committee, and I was asked to speak briefly about the great but sometimes overlooked benefits of the City Club membership. I'm talking about the opportunity to join an issue committee. The issue committees are at the core of the club's mission. They're the opportunity to learn about and discuss public issues which you care about. The Growth Management Environment Committee, which I co-chair with Leanne Barham, has about 80 members on our roster, with about 30 members and invited guests attending our monthly meetings. Our members include land use and transportation, environmental activists, professionals who deal with growth management and environment, such as lawyers, architects, planners, real estate agents, developers, and many other individuals who work in unrelated fields, but who care deeply about these issues. Among the recent topics that we have dealt with this year are PDC's regional and town center projects, the future of the airport, and a discussion with the City Club committee that is studying density issues and how to implement increased density in the city. Next month, our focus will be on the future of long-range planning and implementation of Blueprint 2000, which Charlie will probably discuss a little bit today. Growth Management Environment Committee has an ongoing subcommittee which produces Assumptions of Growth series. This year, Denise Whitney and Bruce Pearson have very successfully continued the monthly gatherings at Patty's Bar and Grill with attendance of about 25 to 30. Assumptions of Growth is an important outreach program for the city, and about 50% of the attendees are non-City Club members who may be having their first City Club experience. Assumptions of Growth has evolved into an important discussion forum facilitating after-meeting discussions, sometimes lasting well into the evening. And programs this year have included discussions about airport noise, Metro's response to the defeat of North-South Light Rail, and next month Commissioner Eric Sten will meet with this group. Periodically, subcommittees emerge because of special interests within the committee, and presently Jane Cease is chairing an information report committee to investigate the impacts of steelhead and salmon listings in the urban development in the region. And finally, I don't want to overlook our occasional field trips. This year, at the invitation of Vancouver, BC councilperson and friend of Portland, Gordon Price, Leanne Barham has organized a tour led by Gordon Price of downtown Vancouver's West End to see how that city has managed growth. Our meetings are held on the first Thursday of each month, And if you would like to know more about the issue committees, attend meetings, or be added to the notification list, call Winnie Kane at the City Club office, and she can put you in touch with the right people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Rod. Our board host today is Doug Marker. Doug is employed with the Northwest Power Planning Council, and after Doug's question, we'll then take questions from the floor. Remember, City Club members only, 30 seconds per question, and only one question. So with those guidelines, I'm sure that we'll have a spirited series of questions for Commissioner Hales. I'm happy to introduce City Commissioner and longtime City Club member Charlie Hales. He was first elected to the City Council in 1992. You might remember back then we had a City Club debate here where it was between the incumbent, another challenger, and Charlie. Well, the incumbent was taking some heat because he had been driving a Portland city car to and from work every day, and evidently he had had a pretty serious stereo system installed in that car by some city employees. So he was being criticized by the other challenger, who said, if I'm elected, I'm going to drive my car to work every day, just like I have in the past. Well, Charlie, quick as always, pointed out, if I'm elected, I'm going to continue to ride the bus as I have in the past. And I guess he still does that. Now, soon in the foreseeable future, Charlie and many of us who live in Northwest Portland will have an opportunity to ride a trolley to work as a result of Charlie's efforts as head of the Portland Office of Transportation. Now, he also heads the Planning Bureau and the Bureau of Buildings, where he has streamlined the previously cumbersome permit process. In the past, he's been in charge of Parks and Recreation, and in that position, he led a successful effort to pass a bond measure to renovate the parks, and he managed conflicts in the siting of community centers, such as the one now being completed at Gabriel Park. But one of the constants I've noticed in Charlie's handling of all the issues that come before the City Council, whether it be long-term plans for the Selwood Bridge or the River District north of downtown, or even the computerized video signs that we have now, is that his number one consideration is the neighborhood and the people of Portland. And I want to tell you, Charlie, we really do appreciate that. Today, Charlie will talk to us about how we as citizens of Portland can exercise more control with regard to our community's future. Join me in welcoming City Commissioner Charlie Hales back to the City Club.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you all. It is an honor to be back here at the club in this capacity rather than just as an interested member. Now, I'm going to disappoint some of you today and surprise the rest, because I'm not going to speak about planning and transportation. And I want you to indulge me for maybe a mention or two of my favorite project, the Central City streetcar. But again, I'm going to avoid the topic that we spend a lot of time on, and I'm going to try instead to achieve a seemingly impossible goal: to give a speech that will not allow Ray Polani to ask me a question about a subway downtown. That's the goal. We'll see. We'll see how I do. Now, don't get me wrong. I still believe that progressive transportation and land use policy are critical to maintaining our high quality of life here in this community and keeping our neighborhoods the best in the nation. But those policies, I believe, are working. And because they're working, I stand here full of energy and optimism and hope for our great city. But I'm also willing to admit that I and my fellow office holders are the beneficiaries of some dumb luck. Our economy is strong, our city is booming, and some national trends like crime rates are breaking our way. Now, we do still face some challenges to Portland's character, but I think it's important to note that those are not the usual suspects. Portlanders are not going to wake up sometime soon and find that our downtown retailers are leaving for the latest suburban mall. We're not going to bulldoze the Hawthorne district for big box retail. And we're not going to cover our waterfront with Californicated gated entry McMansions. We're not going to do that. And I think we've all feared that, and we all have work still to do to assure that those outcomes don't happen here. But I feel like we are on the right track on those issues in this community. You might remember in that first speech I gave here at the City Club, we were so concerned about growth then that I said we should consider forming a new organization and call it SPRAWL, sprawl, for should Portland resemble Anaheim, we're leaving. Well, Portland is not becoming a theme park, and I'm not going anywhere. Neither are we going to be chased into fortified homes by a crime wave, thanks to both those helpful demographic trends and the hiring of 208 more police officers since Mayor Katz and I took office. Portland is a safer city. Now, I don't know whether these last 6 years have been the longest or the shortest of my life. You might notice a slight change in hue in those years since I first spoke here. They've probably been a little bit of both. Certainly they've been challenging and interesting. And I'm proud of the work I'm immersed in, and I'm eager for more. Now, that's not to say that all has been smooth sailing during the time that I've been in City Hall. I want to, in particular, thank my wife, Patty, and my children, Andy, Gavin, and Caitlin, for unwavering support and understanding and putting up with a husband and father who's a public figure. Patty, Andy, and Gavin are here today. Would you please stand and be thanked? There are some other people who have to listen to me on a daily basis who I'd like to thank and recognize as well. Former City Commissioner, now Congressman Earl Blumenauer is here. Earl, thank you for being here today. My colleagues Dan Saltzman and Eric Sten are here as well. Dan, Eric, thank you. City Auditor Gary Blackmer is here. Thank you, Gary, for coming today. And Multnomah County Commissioner Diane Lind is here as well. Where are you, Diane? Thank you. In taking an activist approach to this job, I've learned some of the truth of the old sayings about public service. One of my personal favorites is Russell Sadler's Law. You know, the political columnist Russell Sadler? Sadler's Law is, whatever hits the fan will not be evenly distributed. And even though the truth of that statement has hit home a few times, I come here today with many satisfactions and no complaints. So it would be easy for me to come here today, particularly at the City Club, and dream with you about the planning agenda for this great city. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus not on the what of our community needs, but on the how, not on policies and projects, but on people and politics. Why? Because I've noticed lately that when I listen to active, engaged Portland citizens who are mindful of our future and zealous of our quality of life, I hear a whisper of worry behind the buzz of our prosperity, a ripple of concern about our community's character that maybe lies below the surface, but disturbs it nevertheless. In the immortal words of Linda Tripp, so what's the problem? The problem is that some very fundamental changes have taken place over these last years in Portland. These changes dramatically affect our current and future ability to solve the most critical problems facing us: good schools, strong neighborhoods, and a better transportation system. These changes require us to examine some old and comfortable assumptions, and as a prelude to the next century, consider some new civic arrangements. The first fundamental change we've seen here is the nationalization and internationalization of our business community. Over the years, we've gratefully relied on homegrown, local, active business people to lead us, to help us, and support our civic institutions. From the first park blocks to the most recent one, from the Schnitz to the Salvation Army, from the Japanese garden to the soon-to-be-built classical Chinese garden, our business leaders here in Portland have poured effort and devotion and dollars into their home turf. This scene has changed. Just last week, we lost our fine local brewery, Blitz Weinhardt. Of course, truth be told, we lost them a long time ago when the local owners sold out to a national chain. But the jobs and the suds and even the city revenues still flowed from the plant on Burnside, and now they will be lost. This was just the latest loss. There has also been a long parade of local companies being purchased or merged into national ones: Fred Meyer, PGE, Pacific Corp, Nature's, just to mention a few. Those who now lead our businesses here are often not from here or well-rooted here. Portland is no longer the hometown of many of our chief executive officers. Indeed, many of them hail from Glasgow, Scotland, or Los Angeles, or Houston, or other exotic locations that have a lot less in common than we might hope. Decisions which used to be made here, and I mean literally here, in places like the City Club, are now sent elsewhere. I think this is a significant change, and it's one that we must adjust to. Over the years, we could count on this enlightened business community to support our schools because many of the top people in these businesses graduated from local public schools. We could count on support for neighborhood initiatives because these business leaders had deep roots in our community and its neighborhoods. The second great change involves our state government, and particularly our legislature. In the past, we could assume that when push came to shove, the Oregon legislature would do right for Oregon's largest and greatest city. We assumed that Salem would protect us from the know-nothing politics which sometimes grips our state. These two are assumptions that I think we can no longer rely on. If the current legislative trends prevail, Portland's schools will be dumbed down, our transportation system will become unnavigable, and our economy will be weakened. The third great change is closer to home. It's happening in our neighborhoods. It's a new sense of powerlessness over the neighborhood invaders, traffic congestion, pornography, and development. We've always thought that Portland's neighborhoods would either figure out a way to solve their own problems or organize in such an effective way that City Hall would do it for them. But things have changed in our neighborhoods. Single parenthood, two-job families, competition for volunteer hours from other community and school-based and social organizations have taken away some of the energy and activism from traditional neighborhood organizations. If this sense of powerlessness is not addressed over the next few years, the very fabric of our city, its neighborhoods, will be compromised. So I believe these three changes are upon us: the nationalization or internationalization of our business base, the change in the political dynamics of the state legislature, and an increasing sense of powerlessness, even victimization, at the neighborhood level. Confronted with these changes, we must adapt. We must adopt some new habits, some new principles for our common life. I use the term habits very deliberately for two reasons. One, to distinguish from strategies, because when it comes to public issues, whether it's school funding or light rail or cleaning up the Willamette, we spend most of our time talking about strategies. Strategies are problem-specific and short-term. Habits are general principles and long-term. It may take years for them to show results, good or bad. And there's another difference. While strategies can be created by a few and merely accepted by everyone else, habits work best when they're shared with others, when they're common property. They're not the responsibility of any one institution, not City Hall, not the Chamber of Commerce, not even public schools, although I'll suggest how each of these can help. They're common responsibilities. That makes them more durable, but harder to change. So not just individuals, but communities can have habits. French commentator Alexis de Tocqueville understood this and saw how our common habits distinguished Americans from Europeans. He was amazed by our free exercise of the right to free association and assembly. And he said, "Americans of all conditions, minds, and ages daily acquire a general taste for association and grow accustomed to the use of it. There they meet together, they converse, they listen to one another, and they're mutually stimulated to all sorts of undertakings. They afterward transfer to civil life the notions they've thus acquired and make them subservient to 1,000 purposes. Thus, it's by the enjoyment of a dangerous freedom that Americans learn the habits of the heart, which render freedom less dangerous." So then, if Mr. Tocqueville was right, what habits should we change to deal with the new realities of this business structure and our legislative politics and our individual lives? I'll suggest 4, and at the risk of copyright infringement, call them the 4 habits of effective communities. First, we must recreate or reinvent, if you like, our business community. This means 3 different courses of action. One course is to aggressively sell those out-of-towners who now control local corporations on Portland. If we don't, we'll be in danger that the leadership of those companies won't care about this place, that they won't have a Portland attitude. Will they build their corporate headquarters in the central city on light rail? Or will they assume, as is true in much of America, that the prestigious office address is at some suburban freeway interchange? Will they support community building efforts, great and small, or will their home office not care about the Symphony or Solve or Sellwood? And what can we do about this? Well, I think we can stop assuming that they'll automatically understand the differences between Portland and everywhere else. We should instead ask them to be partners in our vision of a livable city. Better yet, we should demand that they exercise local responsibility, even if their home offices are out of state or out of the country. Our community, business leaders, elected officials, and community activists should reach out to these new corporate citizens, whether they're based in Gresham or Glasgow. We should tell them the Portland story, and if they don't already know it, and ask them to help us write the next chapter. We should teach them our local ways. You know, it's Willamette, not Willamette. It's Cooch Street, not Couch. I want to suggest a new one. Let's start this one here today. It's not suburban, it's suburban. We're going to have to make Portland a place that corporations, multinational or locally owned, choose to invest in, and we're going to have to work at it. For example, although we've lost Blitz Weinhardt as a brewery, the property's still there. We need to work constructively with the Stroh Company to ensure that this property is reused to the highest and best community benefit, as well as being an economic success story in its next life. That's why I've been in contact with John Stroh, and he's agreed to meet with me soon to begin this dialogue. Let's not forget, too, that we're still a manufacturing center, and in great part we have once again inherited that wonderful legacy of high-paying family wage jobs. But we rarely give this a second thought, particularly those of us who work in the central city and who don't maybe regularly travel Front Avenue for the rest of its length. We merely assume that Freightliners, the Escos, the Gundersons, that they'll still be here, that they'll always be here. When rural Oregon suffered the loss of timber industry jobs in the last several decades, most Portlanders didn't think much about it. And we didn't think that so-called plant closure issue, which roiled the legislature, applied to us. But let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that in Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they don't make much steel anymore, if any. This could happen to us, and we need to work actively to make sure that the trends don't leave us behind there. So I think we're going to have to work at maintaining and building our job base and forge new partnerships to keep corporations here and keep them involved positively in our community. Now, there's some already very encouraging signs that this is possible. After Portland General Electric was purchased by Enron, some of the key people at PGE, Fred Miller, Carol Morris, Wayne Lay, did a great job of ensuring that Enron PGE would continue to be a responsible corporate citizen. One tangible example is this company's big commitment to planting street trees all over Portland through a great grassroots organization called Friends of Trees. Through this partnership, 5,000 street trees have been planted in Portland by volunteers in the last 3 years. Some of them are here today, I see. We need to make sure that PGE Enron is ready to step up and renew this 5-year commitment again and again. I want to recognize some of those folks right now. I believe Lynn Harmon Walker, the executive director of Friends of Trees, is here, and also Fred Miller and Wayne Lay and some others from PGE Enron. Fred, Wayne, Lynn, thank you. Well done. Another application of this habit is to nurture and recognize those companies that have stayed here, locally owned and locally involved. Our message to these business partners must be clear. We want you here, not just for your jobs and your property taxes. We want you here for your leadership and continuing to make Portland a great city. In that spirit, we should support local corporate leaders like Standard Insurance and Liberty Northwest, who made decisions to keep their corporate headquarters in the heart of the city. I think that exemplifies their commitment to this community. These corporate leaders have done the right thing, and they deserve our praise. But some others have not, and I believe we should turn up the heat. Moving office jobs out of downtown to the suburbs is sometimes described as a value-free economic decision. It's not. It's an act of civic self-destruction, and we should give it the stigma that it deserves. Friends don't let friends move to the suburbs. So we should take this habit one step further. We should earnestly invite those who moved out to some distant freeway interchange, back when that seemed like a responsible corporate decision, to come back to the city. Now, we've all heard and hopefully applauded the recent decision by Adidas America to move their U.S. headquarters from the suburbs to North Portland. I want to join in saluting that company for setting a great example. But I also want to here and now challenge Phil Knight of Nike to trump his sports shoe rival. So Phil, what do you say? Come on home. Why not return to your roots? We all know that Phil graduated from Cleveland High School, and build Swoosh Tower right here in downtown Portland, on light rail, on the transit mall. Sell that suburban office campus and return those jobs to the heart of your community. Come on, Phil, just do it. Let's ask him to do it. And whether it's an outright move or the growth that happens in those companies, we need their presence here in the central city. They're part of the Portland community, and they shouldn't be absent from its heart. The second habit that we must assume is local authority, not just local responsibility over our schools and transportation systems. One reason citizens feel nervous about the future is that they feel that things are slipping out of their control. And you know what? They're right. Things are slipping. What's changed? Not just the ideology of the legislature, but the practice of how we make decisions. It was common in the 1970s and 80s, Earl remembers this, to have bills passed in the legislature which provided special authority to cities, sometimes just to Portland, to solve problems that were local. Seen any of those kind of bills lately? Now again, it's not just that the legislature is hostile to Portland, but that we've gotten out of the habit of solving local problems locally and have tossed a crazy mixture of issues and problems, some of them statewide, some of them local, some of them regional, all tossed to Salem. This state of affairs was not the product of some constitutional convention or town hall meeting, but was rather the unexpected side effect of the Measure 5 packaging scheme sold to Oregon voters by Bill Sizemore. On the outside of the package was a very seductive promise. It said, limit your property taxes. But on the inside, once we opened it up, there was the booby prize, lose your local control. That's why the state legislature is now acting as our school board. Yes, we still have local school boards made up of hardworking and well-meaning people who are accountable and responsible for local public schools, but there's a big problem. While those folks have the responsibility and strive to be accountable to us as their constituents, they no longer have much authority over the schools that they allegedly manage. That authority, thanks to Mr. Sizemore, rests solely in Salem. Peggy Perlin, who's a school board member from Medford, commented on this problem on Monday as she made the pilgrimage to Salem. She said, it's very wearying, but as a school board member, you're a king without a kingdom until you talk to them. When it comes to funding our transportation system, voters years ago limited the use of state gas tax revenues to fund only our road system. Only our state legislature can approve higher gas taxes. So while we're moving ahead with several locally funded initiatives, like the Central City streetcar and airport light rail, the community needs that are dependent on state funding, road improvements, a better bus system, lay on the table unfunded by the state. And to top it off, we have term limits. This ensures that little or no institutional memory remains in the legislature, and that a legislator's clock is running as soon as they arrive. So when someone asks you to introduce a bill about what was previously understood to be a local matter, why not? This trend, statewide legislation on very local matters, is simply out of control in Salem, due at least in part to a permanent state of legislative short-timers. Folks, I think we need a new civic arrangement with Salem. Do we really expect part-time, term-limited state legislators from the rest of Oregon to fully understand and properly fund Portland's public schools? We need to stop tolerating a situation in which both education and transportation, where authority lies in one place, the state capitol, but responsibility for the condition in the classroom or on the street lies in another, the local community and its public agencies. We need to ask the legislative leadership to work with us in a new partnership for some shared goals. Let's set a reasonable level of statewide support in both education and transportation, and then provide headroom for local needs and local priorities. Let's re-empower local citizens to meet some local needs as they see fit. Let's put some of that local authority back with the local responsibility. And let's decide what are statewide responsibilities, what are local ones, and then stick to that understanding. Once again, let me repeat. This loss of local control that we now take for granted was not something openly debated or decided by Oregonians. It was an accident of history, a Sizemore packaging scam. I'm not willing to stake my children's education and the education of 70,000 other kids in Portland to an accident of history. Are you? The third habit that we Portlanders must practice is the re-empowerment of our neighborhoods and the revitalization of grassroots problem solving in what is now, admittedly, a bigger city. Once again, there's a negative way to describe this, just as there was with corporate restructuring. And once again, the good old days are gone. Let's face it, people are busier. All of this wonderful technology has not given us more free time. I saw you on your cell phone out in the hall on the way in. Instead, it's merely allowed us to cram more things into the day, move more rapidly. We drive and conduct business over our car phones. We eat lunch at our desks. We spend more time commuting to and from work. Along with this, democracy is undergoing some fundamental changes. Here in Oregon, we don't even go to the church basement or the school gym to vote anymore. Instead, voting has become more like mailing in your publisher's clearinghouse entry than a civic ritual. People are busier. We're less connected. We need to approach each other, therefore, in some new ways. Now, there's some new ideas out there taking hold and offering some hope. Some neighborhoods have begun to deal with neighborhood issues at the grassroots level. In Hollywood and in St. John's, for example, interested and active citizens have begun to decide what kind of place they want those neighborhoods to be. This bottoms-up planning of future land use and transportation needs is, I believe, the wave of the future. The days of gargantuan community plans landing on people's heads with a thud are over, and they should be. I want to propose one more way for us to invite more citizens into our political process. Shortly, I'll propose legislation moving some of Portland's City Council meetings to the evening. Plain and simple. Every Wednesday evening at 6 p.m., we should convene our weekly City Council session. It's a travesty that right now, the only people who can regularly afford to attend City Council meetings, in fact, they get paid to do so, are lobbyists, lawyers, consultants, journalists, and city staff. Real Portland citizens have to take time off from work or pay for a babysitter if they want to have their say about community decisions. Every other city in Oregon does it this way. And folks, I think it's high time for us to do the same. In addition to you'll be there, but you come now. In addition to a policy that all planning is local and having city council meetings when working people can attend them, we need to open up neighborhood activism to more kinds of activities in order to attract more kinds of people. We know citizens will find the time to participate in worthwhile community projects, even in these busy lives that we now lead. There's some wonderful examples out there. The Woodstock neighborhood just recently did a great neighborhood plan for their Main Street, Woodstock Boulevard. And then they went out and got a $200,000 grant to start building the improvements and planting the street trees. In Selwood, a guy named Mark Lakeman and his neighbors have transformed an intersection into a magnet for a real community. Volunteers in Northwest Portland have developed a detailed plan to landscape away the ugliness along Interstate 405 right here through the central city, and they've now applied for a state grant to do the work. Depending on what happens with Vera's plan, they might have to add grow lights, but it's still a good idea. These projects are different from the issues which still dominate traditional neighborhood associations in Portland, although some of those neighborhood associations are leading this change. The differences are, first, that these are tangible, hands-on community improvement projects, not just more meetings. And two, these projects are welcoming for lots of volunteers, particularly young people. These projects are fun and young people participate. And I think the next generation of neighborhood activists are an important group to attract. And that leads me to the fourth habit of a healthy community. The fourth habit that I think we must practice is to connect that next generation with our local history and with their community. Remember the wonderful success that we had with recycling here in Portland, how we now recycle more per person than almost any community in America. Maybe we recycle more people too, but it's another story. More term limits. How did we do that? It was our kids. Earl Blumenauer and some others put this idea together, and then we used the kids. They went to school, learned about recycling, came home, made mom and dad feel guilty about throwing that bottle or that can in the trash. They were the shock troops for a successful cultural revolution in how we deal with solid waste. Well, I think we need those kids again. But this time, we need our kids to learn about our city's history and learn about and take ownership of their community. Now, thanks to new education standards, our children are expected to absorb and regurgitate a plethora of facts and figures. They learn about the Civil War and the Boston Tea Party, about George Washington and Eleanor Roosevelt, about the bomb and the Beatles. And you know what we don't teach them? We don't teach them about local government. We don't teach them about Portland. We don't teach them about our rich civic history, about the Olmsted brothers, or why we built Max instead of a freeway, or why the city of Portland even has neighborhood associations. We don't teach them those things. Charles Jordan says, and I think he's right, what kids don't understand, they won't value. What they won't value, they won't protect. And what they won't protect, they'll lose. Now, luckily, some teachers and schools are breaking through and filling this vacuum. At David Douglas High School, industrial and engineering teacher Mark Hayner challenged his 11th and 12th grade students in 1997 to develop a way to help physically challenged kids move between buildings on the high school campus. After kicking around ideas like a moving sidewalk, they finally settled on building a 700-foot-long light rail shuttle line. The shuttle car itself is, get this, 2 mini school buses cut in half and their front ends reattached. Already more than 250 students have worked on the light rail line, and 35 local businesses have contributed time and money to it. This is an amazing project. I've been out there and seen it myself. The train may run as early as this spring, and final completion is only a year away. What a great partnership of private business, students, and teachers. I believe he's here. I'd like to ask Mark Hayner and Principal John Harrington and several of their students to stand and be recognized. Great work, Mark. Last year at Portsmouth Middle School, students completed an inventory of street trees as part of the Cathedral Park neighborhood. The students covered a 19-block area between the park and the St. John's Business District. Thanks to the students' work, a database was established containing information on the type and the health of all the existing street trees, as well as an identification of sites for future plantings. The students presented their findings to the Urban Forestry Commission and to the St. John's Neighborhood Association in the hopes of stimulating more street tree plantings and eventually creating a green corridor between Peninsula Park and the downtown St. John's Business District. I'd like to ask teacher Doug Salter and some of his students to stand and be recognized for great work. Doug, thank you. These are just 2 exciting examples of how business, community organizations, government, and the next generation can work together. I believe these links between our kids and this unique community we live in need to become the norm, not the exception. I believe that the civic education of our children is a habit that we must develop if we want to remain a healthy city. Now, this is a dangerous one because it's so easy to assume that this is someone else's job. Remember how at the beginning I talked about habits being common property? Silly example that might make my point. Portland drivers don't honk in traffic jams. This pleases some and vexes others, particularly people who've moved here from New York or New Jersey. They don't understand this. Well, who's responsible for this habit? Who's responsible for this habit that we don't honk in traffic? Exactly. We all are. So, I don't want to make the dangerous assumption on this matter of civic education that it's the school's job, one more thing for the teacher to cram into the day. That's not what I'm assuming. I'm not leaping to the conclusion about who in particular should take leadership in helping our children develop the habit of citizenship. But I believe very strongly that we, yes, we, must do this. Luckily, some others are already hard at work. The Oregon Historical Society, under the leadership of Chet Orloff, has already introduced legislation in Salem to establish an Oregon standard for civics education. This would give Oregon's teachers the resources they need to teach about Oregon and its communities to its children. I think the city of Portland should strongly support this bill. But we need to go one step further. I've asked Chet Orloff, and he's agreed, to lead a coalition of museums, libraries, and school districts and communities throughout the state to work on finding more ways to involve kids in their community and to enhance their sense of their history. So, some of the basic ingredients in our local democracy have changed. If we note these changes and adapt, I think will succeed and will flourish. But if we keep waiting for the good old times to come back, they won't, and we'll grow more frustrated, isolated, and saddened as not bad decisions, but missed opportunities erode our quality of life here. The structure of local corporations, the way our citizens involve themselves in their community, and the way our community works with the institution of the legislature have all changed. These changes require not just new strategies by old institutions, but new habits. And adopting those new habits will put our community into condition for the future, allowing us to preserve and reinforce Portland's uniqueness rather than having it swept away by currents of change. Portland's uniqueness is not, after all, created by Waterfront Park or Max or Pioneer Courthouse Square. Those are results. Those are results, not causes of our community's uniqueness. The uniqueness is this is a community where people care about the place, where they work constructively together for its stewardship. How should we work together in this changed environment? First, we should nourish our business base for the jobs, the community leadership, and the philanthropy by actively reaching out to new players in our economic structure, wherever they are, and by supporting and recognizing local business leaders who are doing the right thing for our community. I'm asking Don McClave of the Portland Chamber and Ruth Scott of the Association for Portland Progress and other business leaders to work with city government to set up something of a corporate welcome wagon, a group of local business leaders who will take the time to tell the Portland story to their new colleagues, even if they don't call Portland home, and to more aggressively and effectively retain and expand Portland's job base. Second, we should forge a new compact with Salem, where from now on a constant rotation of term-limited legislators will struggle with a bewildering variety of issues. We should work with them, again, to shift more of the authority for local services back to local communities and their citizens. I'll bring this issue up when the City Council meets next week with Brady Adams and Lynn Snodgrass during our City Council's regular meeting with them. Third, we should make citizenship more real by making City Hall more accessible to the people who own it. Not just the building, it's in great shape now, but the decisions that are made there. Let's make them at a time and in a way that our citizens can participate. And we should make citizenship more tangible in people's lives by fostering hands-on neighborhood improvement as a way to solve problems and connect citizens to one another. And fourth, we should take on the civic education of our young people, not just by changing the curriculum or taking field trips to City Hall, but by giving students a chance to live citizenship by doing it, pulling ivy in Forest Park, planning the revitalization of Hollywood's business district, or reaching out to their neighbors, as the kids at Grout Elementary have done with the elderly residents across Holgate Boulevard. Will these habits ensure that Portland is a great city 20 years from now? Of course not by themselves, but they'll help. And in practicing these habits of a healthy community, I think something magical happens. Not just that we might pass a school funding bill or keep a corporate headquarters here or build a play structure in a neighborhood that needs one, but that in coming together to teach a wider audience what makes Portland unique, in coming together to practice with a wider audience what makes Portland unique, we'll ensure in 1,000 small acts that that story will remain true. By these principles, by these disciplines, we can help assure that people care about this place and keep finding new ways and new volunteers and new possibilities. This civic health, like the fact that we don't honk in traffic or actually wait for the walk signal or say Willamette, this civic health won't be traceable to any one person or civic institution. You might say it will have become a habit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hales. I want to ask you to take some of your comments concerning suburban development and corporate presence in the region and apply it to a current decision, which happily isn't yours directly, but that is Intel's request for a significant abatement of property taxes to continue operating in Hillsborough. And what I want to ask you is, what do you think is the interest of Portland in that decision, and do you think that's one that Portland should support or oppose?
Thanks, Doug. I think that we have used as a region tax policy, including tax abatements like the SIP program, pretty effectively. We have, through public sector policies like those, helped spark a national success story in building this as an economically sound region. And that was a good habit, if you will, for the time. But do we need those tools today? Do they need to work in the same way? I don't think so. I don't think we need them in the same way that we needed them before. And if we're going to use tax policy to incent development, let's make sure that we're incenting the right kind of development. That is, and let's look at the full costs. If we're going to give away tax resources for development in Portland or Hillsborough or anywhere else that will then require the construction of millions or tens of millions of dollars worth of road infrastructure in order to even serve the place. And if 95% of the people who work there are going to get there in single occupancy vehicles, it's a bad bargain. So not so much that deal in particular, but I think we should do a better job of integrating what we say this region wants to be with the day-to-day or short-term decisions about corporate or economic development. Who's next?
Oh, all right. Charlie, Elaine Cogan, and this is a good segue into my question, which is, in your call for companies to come home, Nike come home, etc., what message are you sending to our regional partners, the Beavertons and the Greshams of the world? Aren't we all in this together?
Yes, we are, Elaine, and there's growth to go around. But if you remember, the argument for adding the for example, the Kaiser Riviera addition to the urban growth boundary out there on the Sunset Highway was that we needed to have more space for industrial development. Well, if it's going to be industrial development on the edge of the community, great, whether it's in Gresham or Portland's Columbia South Shore or in Hillsborough. But if it's office development, and that's really what I'm talking about here, creative jobs like those at Nike, as Wyden and Kennedy have already figured out, work best if they're in an environment where there are lots of other people, where there's lots of interaction, where that creative process gets fueled by the environment where people work. Well, I think that's in their interest to take a look at a downtown environment for that reason. But the region has an interest in where office jobs go, because office jobs at a suburban freeway interchange, one of the worst examples of this recently was the ignominious decision by the Public Employees Retirement System to move their offices from downtown Portland to a one-story building with a big parking lot at a suburban freeway interchange. That was a terrible decision, not only because it's our public sector employees' money that's fueling this, but because it's contrary to the Barbara Roberts executive order that they shouldn't do that anymore. So I think those office jobs are really where I'm focusing. If you're talking about creative work, designing software, advertising, much of the creative work that's done in these companies belongs, I believe, in the healthy environment of a downtown. And again, we have something to sell now. 25 years ago, when the first new corporate investments, things like Nordstrom, were made in the downtown, it was a long shot. Would Portland really be able to reverse the national hollowing out of cities? Would we be able to rebuild a different kind of economy in the downtown? Well, look around. We have. There's 18 cranes out there today building everything from housing to hotels to new office. We no longer have to make the case that being downtown is a smart long-term investment. And in fact, now there's a national movement back to cities. So I think we have a much stronger selling position that those kinds of jobs belong downtown. But there's going to be economic growth for all. But whether it's as a region or as a city, we ought to figure out where the particular types of jobs should be. We shouldn't allow, the city of Portland shouldn't allow the construction of major new office buildings in our industrial districts, like the Columbia South Shore. So we should practice what we preach here, both locally and regionally. Irwin.
Charlie, Irwin Mandel, City Club member. Your idea of an evening city council session, I think, is superb. I recall the one that was held several years back when we were involved in arguing about that 12-story parking lot that, thank God, will never appear. And it was a packed meeting. I have a question for you about that. It really originates with my wife, so I'll give credit where credit is due. When you have an evening city council session, what do you think of the idea, perhaps, of providing some child care facilities for that meeting so that people don't have to hire babysitters to come in and attend the meeting.
Great idea. Very creative idea. In fact, David Kish, the manager of our Bureau of General Services, who's here today, is now working on a proposal to put a child care center for city employees and other people in that nearby area on the first floor of the Portland building after the permit center moves out to its new building. So I'd love to have that used not just during the day for downtown workers, but also make it available for drop-in daycare for people who come to the meeting in the evening. Great idea. Thank you, Lily. Credit where credit's due, Erwin. Good idea. Thank you. Yes.
Commissioner Hales, I'm Ted Falk, and I'm chair of the City Club's research studies looking into housing density, and I wanted to thank you personally and the members of your staff that have taken a great deal of your time to give us a lot of information and insights and ideas. And because of that committee's work, I'd like to ask you a question relating to the topic that you set aside at the very beginning of your speech, and that is planning. Although I thought your topic of habits of the heart was also very fascinating. But I think you're aware of criticism that has been made by organizations such as the American Institute of Architects about the fact that the city seems to have many different planning studies that arise sort of like mushrooms in every different commissioner's office, and that many of them seem to acquire their own momentum and not be coordinated with one another. I wonder, first of all, you think that criticism is valid, and if it is valid, how you think it ought to be addressed?
I'd say, Ted, that I think it's valid in part, and that is there's always, in any large organization, whether it's the commission form of government or some other, an opportunity to do better in terms of the integration between agencies or between projects. So I welcome the inquiry that the mayor is taking on to rethink the organizational structure of how we do long-range planning, whether we should have that work done by PDC and the Planning Bureau and others. Those are all good questions. But I want to go back to my point about neighborhoods. We're a much bigger city than we were in 1975, say, when the last effort was made to create an integrated planning organization. East Portland, 100,000 people has been added to our city limits, for example, since then. And so I think in that environment, a more neighborhood-based approach to planning makes sense. And it might be different in one neighborhood versus another. For example, I mentioned Hollywood. There, it's an effort led by architects and business people and neighborhood activists about placemaking. How do we want Hollywood to change from a place people drive through to a place where they walk around and enjoy a wonderful neighborhood commercial district? In St. John's, it was really a capacity-based exercise by a weird variety of organizations, the softball clubs, all kinds of different groups than you would normally see in a planning process got together and said, what's right about St. John's and what's wrong about St. John's? And they want to talk about planning issues, but they want to talk about a long list of other things, everything from daycare to social service agencies and how they work better with the community. The churches are very involved. I'm very impressed that city government, through its agencies, has in these two cases been able to work in a very different way in two very different places and do it the way that the people who live there wanted it done, rather than having a downtown think tank, whether it's the Planning Bureau or any other, tell them how we're going to stamp the usual, what's the word the architects use, icons on their neighborhood. So I think we need to try to follow that model. Look at how popular and successful those two planning projects are versus the Southwest Community Plan. And I think you see the difference in the two approaches. So although I welcome the mayor's inquiry into reorganization, I would counsel her to beware centralization, because I think people in the neighborhoods won't tolerate it. Thanks. We have one microphone, yes.
John Leeper, City Club member. Charlie, as a spokesman for the city of Portland, you have espoused a good position.
Thank you.
My perspective and my question to you is, though, in that there are more citizens in the metropolitan area that live outside the city, what is your perspective of the city's relationship to the counties and cities? Because as I drive in and out Highway 26 coming into downtown, I see as much traffic going west as I see going east.
Exactly. Well, as many of you know, I've been up to my neck since before I was an elected official I see Jim Zirin here. He and I have spent more time in meetings at Metro than either of us would care to admit, working on the regional planning process. And I still think, and again, although I didn't speak about it today, it's one of the things I believe is most valuable about us as a region. But we have a lot of work to do to turn those regional ideas into reality at the neighborhood level, and a lot of mistakes to undo, whether it's 82nd Avenue or Canyon Road. We did a lot of bad development in the last 50 years, and we have a lot of work to do to make those into better places. And that work is not just being done in Portland. I'm very impressed with what's being done in the city of Fairview and in Beaverton's new town center and what they did with light rail in downtown Hillsborough. There's great work going on out there in terms of planning and placemaking in Portland's other communities in the metropolitan area. But we also have to learn to start saying no to some things. And again, the question of job location. One very tough battle at the regional table was whether people would be allowed in those industrial areas to allow a lot of retail. And the city of Portland fought at the regional table to say, no, don't put big box retail in your industrial areas. That uses them up. And then you create all those folks in minivans trying to buy groceries at Costco when they're trying to move steel by on trucks. It doesn't work. And so we also have to keep together in the metro area raising the bar about what's appropriate and inappropriate planning practice. So that's a collaborative process. It has to continue being one. I think in order for this process to work well, more places in the metro area have to do what Beaverton and Fairview and Hillsborough have done, and that is state very clearly what kind of place they want to be. Not just engage in empty boosterism about we want more jobs and more housing and more development here, but say we want Hillsborough to be this kind of place and then set about getting it, just as we're trying to do in Hollywood and St. John's. So I think that maybe should be our, Daniel Burnham said when it comes to planning, let your watchword be order and your beacon beauty. Let's have people plan great places and then regionally support them in doing that. And then if they tried to slide back based on expediency, I'll be there to push them back onto the path. Yes, sir.
BJ Seymour, City Club member. I'm aware that you will be seeking input from the appropriate neighborhood association and so on, but I would be interested in your thinking about what would be the highest and best use for what has been the Blitz-Weinhardt property. Are you looking at housing? Are you looking at Swish Tower being there? Are you looking at a community center? What kind of things
Thanks,
appeal
BJ.
to you?
Well, I've had some ideas, but I don't have a grand scheme to roll out in front of John Stroh or anyone else. I mean, the highest and best use is beer. After that, everything else is secondary. So if we don't get beer making, maybe we could have Brew U. Maybe we could have a university there because we're now the biggest brewing city in the country. So maybe we could have a university there where all of our local brewers and our local now growing brewing industry develops the next cadre of brewmasters and workers. There's some wonderful old historic buildings there, so regardless of what happens to the site, I certainly hope we can creatively reuse those buildings in a way that's, again, economically successful for the property owner, but also results in a great place. A couple of those old brick buildings from the early 1900s or late 1800s, it'd be a tragedy to lose them. So I think it's going to be a fun process for the community and hopefully a fun process for the property owner to get creative like this. If not suds, then what?
Yes.
Let's have one last question.
Okay. Kurt Wabering, City Club member and chair of the Billboard Committee. Duty and order question. Could you summarize for us where we are and how we're going to get out of this dilemma, particularly regarding the electronic signs, of which there are several around now that are non-conforming and still flashing?
Yes. I'll try to summarize a very litigious and murky situation in a way that won't get me in trouble with the city attorney or lose you. We're taking a strategy in the city of Portland to be very clear and very consistent about signs and say billboards should be regulated like any other signs, and all signs should be regulated by our zoning code in a way that protects traffic safety and maintains some kind of aesthetic sensibility that we're not Las Vegas here. And the technology changes in the sign industry, particularly the wall signs that are pasted onto walls and these electronic signs, caught us by surprise. So in the short run, there's going to be more bad signs. In the longer run, I hope we make some sense out of all this and have Portland, once again, look different from everywhere else. That's our goal. Thank you all very much for having me back. Thank you.